What if the story of Earth is far older, far stranger, and far more mysterious than anything we have ever allowed ourselves to imagine? What if existence itself hides chapters so ancient that even the dinosaurs, those giants we treat as the earliest titans of life, were merely late arrivals to a planet already shaped by forgotten worlds? Tonight, we step into a realm where science meets speculation, where geology becomes a vault of unanswered questions, and where the very definition of civilization is challenged by the silent testimony of deep time. This is an invitation to gaze into the abyss of Earth's pre-dinosaur past and ask, who or what might have risen, flourished, and disappeared long before the first reptilian footsteps echoed across primordial landscapes? Open your mind to a planet unrecognizable, an Earth dominated by forces, climates, and biological experiments that have no modern analog. Imagine oceans glowing with unfamiliar organisms, continents bearing patterns that hint at intentionality, and fossil beds where structures appear that do not neatly fit into evolutionary timelines. These mysteries compel us to confront a simple yet unsettling possibility: that our understanding of early life may be built on fragments, and that the missing pages might contain entire civilizations erased by geological cycles, too immense for ordinary human memory to grasp. The power of this question lies not in sensationalism, but in humility. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Human beings occupy barely an instant of that span. Even the dinosaurs, with their 160 million years of dominance, represent only a sliver. Between cataclysms and continental shifts, the planet has endured countless resets. Life has risen in waves, died out in silence, and evolved again under new forms. If civilizations existed in these forgotten epochs, they would not leave behind bronze statues or carved stones. They might not resemble us in any way. Their traces would be imprinted not in ruins, but in anomalies. Patterns in rock, unexplained fossil structures, chemical signatures, or disruptions in the evolutionary record. Consider the enigmatic fossils of the Ediacaran period. Organisms with fractal bodies, geometric symmetry, and shapes that defy biological logic. Some appear engineered, others entirely alien to modern forms of life. Scientists debate their origins, their complexity, and even whether they should be classified as animals at all. Yet hidden within these forms is a haunting question. Were they simply nature's early experiments, or do they reflect an intelligence incomprehensible to us, one that thrived long before the Earth stabilized into the world we know? Imagine a civilization not built with metal or fire, but with biology itself. A world where intelligence arose in soft-bodied organisms, in reefs that communicated chemically, or in networks of ancient life woven into the fabric of the ocean floor. Such beings would leave no temples, no tools, no bones. Their legacy would dissolve into the sediment, their cities reclaimed by rising seas, their stories compressed into stone. And yet, through subtle markers, through fossils that should not exist, through ancient formations that resist explanation, their presence may still whisper across millions of years. To explore this is not to abandon science. It is to extend it. It is to embrace the idea that the universe is more creative than we assume, that life is more adaptable than we credit, and that civilization is not a human invention, but a phenomenon that might emerge whenever conditions permit. By questioning the boundaries of our knowledge, we honor the scientific spirit. By contemplating the unknown, we open ourselves to the vastness of Earth's untold history. Before we continue, I invite you to engage with this journey. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe ancient civilizations could have existed before the dinosaurs, or do you think the evidence points elsewhere? Your insight adds depth to this exploration. And if you find meaning in uncovering mysteries like these, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Each gesture strengthens our community of curious minds searching for answers hidden in the ancient layers of time. Long before the first dinosaur took its colossal step across a shifting supercontinent, Earth was already a theater of creation and destruction, so vast that our language struggles to describe it. To understand the possibility of prehistoric civilizations before the dinosaurs, we have to descend far deeper into time than we are accustomed to. We must enter an era where continents were still assembling themselves, where oceans were alien laboratories, and where life, whatever form it took, was not bound to the familiar shapes we know today. Imagine a world where intelligence could arise without bones, without tools, without fire. A world where consciousness could inhabit bodies soft as shadows, luminous as deep-sea organisms, or interconnected like coral forests that pulsed with collective awareness. These ideas might feel speculative, even fantastical, but only because our modern framework is built upon an incredibly narrow slice of existence. When you stretch your gaze across hundreds of millions of years, when you let geological time reshape your intuition, the improbable becomes merely unexamined, and the impossible becomes a question of perspective. Take the Ediacaran period, for example, an age so chronologically distant that calling it ancient almost loses meaning. It gave rise to life forms that do not fit comfortably into our tree of life. Some were shaped like fractal leaves, others like rippled discs, others still like branching labyrinths etched into the sea floor. These beings lacked heads, eyes, mouths, and limbs, yet they exhibited geometric precision that challenges our sense of what complexity should look like. Some researchers argue these organisms were early experiments of evolution that failed to persist, while others propose they represent an evolutionary lineage that has no surviving descendants. But an even more intriguing perspective emerges when we consider how intelligence might develop in forms fundamentally different from our own. We assume intelligence expresses itself through tools, fire, architecture, and physical manipulation of the environment. But what if intelligence can bloom without hands, without metal, without stone? If a coral reef can communicate chemically across vast networks, if slime molds can solve mazes and optimize routes, if octopuses, beings radically different from us, can display startling problem-solving abilities, then why couldn't an ancient biosphere harbor a level of organization or awareness that simply left no traditional archaeological footprint? The geological record itself invites these questions. Consider stromatolites, layered structures created by microbial colonies billions of years ago. They represent early examples of biological architecture, living cities built by microorganisms cooperating across vast expanses of shallow seas. These structures still exist today in limited environments, but imagine an epoch in which they dominated coastlines, forming sprawling biological metropolises that rose and fell in synchrony with tides long vanished. Not civilizations in the human sense, but civilizations in the sense of collective order, communication, and adaptation. They reveal a planetary truth. Life has always organized itself in ways that challenge human definitions. And on a planet that has resurfaced itself countless times, any evidence of more advanced forms of such organization could have been recycled into magma, compressed into metamorphic rock, or scattered as molecular ghosts across sediments older than mountains. We must also consider the cycles of destruction that punctuate Earth's deep history. Cataclysmic volcanic eruptions, global ice ages, oceanic anoxia events, and gamma-ray bursts have reset life repeatedly. These are not rare anomalies, they are recurring rhythms. With each reset, entire ecosystems disappeared. Entire evolutionary branches collapsed. If any civilization, no matter how advanced or biologically unique, existed before the dinosaurs, these catastrophic intervals would have obliterated their cities, their tools, their symbols, leaving behind only enigmatic anomalies, fossil patterns that defy categorization, geochemical signatures that hint at unusual processes, sediment layers that suggest abrupt changes in global conditions, and indeed, we find such anomalies across the geologic record. Not proof, but whispers. Not evidence, but invitations to look deeper. One particularly haunting example is the existence of mysterious Precambrian structures that resemble footprints or trackways in rocks older than complex animals. Mainstream science explains them as abiotic formations caused by shifting sediments and microbial mats. But the patterns are tantalizingly regular, as if something or someone once moved across an ancient seafloor. Another curiosity lies in pre-dinosaur metal spheres, with precisely carved grooves found in South African mines, embedded in rock layers billions of years old. They are most likely natural concretions formed through unknown mineral processes, yet their perfect symmetry and parallel lines continue to provoke speculation. These phenomena do not force us to assume ancient civilizations existed, but they do remind us that Earth holds secrets we have not yet deciphered. The absence of conventional evidence is not evidence of absence. It is merely a reflection of how violently Earth erases its own past. Continents drift, oceans swallow land masses, mountains rise and crumble, and the crust itself is consumed by the mantle. If a civilization existed hundreds of millions of years before the dinosaurs, it would require extraordinary geological luck for even a fragment of its material culture to survive. The real question becomes, what should we expect to find? And the answer is simple. Not pyramids, not tools, not carvings, but patterns. Patterns in fossils, patterns in chemistry, patterns in the abrupt leaps and collapses of evolution. If these patterns represent natural processes, fine. But if they hint at something more, then we are standing at the edge of a revelation that humanity has not yet learned to process. And the deeper we go into these mysteries, the more we must prepare ourselves to see the world not as a linear progression, but as a long sequence of forgotten chapters layered beneath our feet, waiting for someone patient enough to notice the small deviations that change everything, waiting for someone curious enough to question the assumptions that limit our imagination, waiting for someone willing to follow these anomalies into the next question, which begins when we ask what kind of world could give rise to such ancient and untraceable forms of civilization, because the environment that shaped them may have been unlike anything we know today, a world where the boundaries of life and intelligence blur into something that forces us to reconsider the very definition of civilization itself. A world where the world that existed before the age of dinosaurs was shaped by conditions so extreme, so volatile, and so profoundly alien that even imagining them requires dismantling everything. We think we know about how life emerges, evolves, and organizes itself. To understand how a prehistoric civilization, biological, intelligent, or collectively conscious, could rise in such an environment, we must first step into a landscape sculpted by forces that seem almost mythological through today's standards. Picture vast supercontinents forming and tearing apart in spans so long that even mountains became temporary features. Picture oceans rich in minerals and chemicals that modern life would find toxic, yet within which early organisms adapted and thrived. The air was thicker with volcanic gases, the skies often darkened by global ash veils, and climates shifted with an unpredictability that would challenge any form of stability. Yet within this chaos lay opportunity. Conditions like these may have sparked bursts of evolutionary creativity beyond anything our familiar history records. Each extinction event may have cleared the slate, while each recovery phase offered new biochemical freedoms. And within these cycles, life could experiment, transform, and innovate in ways unimaginable today. Consider the era known as Snowball Earth, when ice sheets may have covered the entire planet, locking oceans beneath miles of frozen silence. Beneath that ice, hydrothermal vents sustained ecosystems completely independent of sunlight, relying on chemical gradients instead. Some scientists argue that these environments, far from being barren prisons, may have nurtured early biological intelligence in forms adapted to darkness, pressure, and mineral-rich fluid systems. These organisms might have communicated through electrical pulses, chemical oscillations, or vibrational patterns transmitted through water. If intelligence evolved here, it would leave no stone carvings or metal residues. Instead, its structures might resemble mineral-organic hybrid formations, biofilms arranged into networks, or symmetrical growths mistaken for geological curiosities. Such traces could still exist, hidden in remote oceanic crusts or trapped in metamorphic rock formed by ancient seafloors. But without knowing what to look for, we classify these signatures as anomalies, treating them as mere accidents of chemistry rather than the possible echoes of a civilization that thrived in Earth's earliest oceans. Another factor that shaped the pre-dinosaur world was the planet's atmosphere. It underwent dramatic transformations, oxygenation events, methane-rich phases, carbon dioxide spikes. Each atmospheric shift altered evolutionary pathways. For instance, the Great Oxygenation Event triggered one of the most significant mass extinctions in Earth's history. Organisms accustomed to low oxygen environments died out, making room for more complex forms. Yet imagine an intelligent biosphere adapted to low oxygen chemistry. A civilization built on anaerobic processes, thriving in chemical gradients we consider inhospitable. When oxygen surged, that world might have vanished completely, its biochemistry erased, its biological markers oxidized beyond recognition. We search for artifacts in the wrong conditions, assuming intelligence is oxygen-dependent, tool-based, and technological in a form similar to ours. But intelligence could have arisen multiple times through biochemical routes extinguished long before vertebrates appeared. To understand the environment such beings inhabited, imagine forests of giant fungi dominating landscapes before the first complex animals roamed. During the Devonian period, towering fungal organisms known as prototaxides rose over 20 feet tall, creating ecosystems that seem impossible today. If such massive organisms were possible, it's not unreasonable to imagine that networks of fungi acted as early communication systems, nature's own version of neural architecture. In modern forests, fungal mycelium forms shared networks among trees, exchanging nutrients and information. These networks regulate growth, detect threats, and adapt collectively. Scale this back hundreds of millions of years, combined with more intense atmospheric conditions, and something far more organized could emerge. A fungal-based intelligence wouldn't construct monuments or tools. It would engineer ecosystems, altering soil chemistry, climate patterns, or reproductive strategies. Its traces would be woven into the very fabric of ancient sediments, invisible to any eye expecting stone pyramids or bronze sculptures. And yet, perhaps some of the strange radial fossil impressions, often dismissed as biological puzzles, are the remnants of such network-based structures. If intelligence emerged in an era dominated by oceanic worlds, volcanic basins, or fungal networks, then we must acknowledge that its technological expression would differ radically from ours. Imagine technology grown, not built. Technology that dissolves into the environment, returning to mineral form. Technology indistinguishable from the biosphere that created it. In such a world, tools are not made, they are evolved. Structures are not constructed, they are grown. Communication is not linguistic, it is chemical, harmonic, electromagnetic. And because these expressions are transient, cyclic, and integrated into nature itself, they leave no permanent, recognizable trace. Yet the world they shaped would bear subtle scars, unusual isotopic ratios, sudden bursts of biodiversity, or the abrupt disappearance of entire ecosystems replaced by unfamiliar ones. These shifts exist in the geological record as puzzles. We call them unexplained evolutionary events, but they may represent the rise and fall of forms of organization we simply lack the framework to identify. Imagine an oceanic civilization that manipulated chemical gradients the way we manipulate electricity. Their cities would be shimmering colonies of engineered microorganisms, their knowledge encoded in biochemical patterns. Their transportation based on currents and controlled buoyancy systems evolved from biological traits. When continents shifted, when volcanoes erupted, when oceans acidified, their entire world system could collapse in a geological instant, becoming nothing more than microfossils scattered through sedimentary layers. If such a civilization peaked during a warm interval, only to vanish as ice advanced, the melting and refreezing cycles would obliterate any physical signatures. And the deeper we explore these possibilities, the more we recognize that Earth, as a planet, does not preserve its past kindly. It recycles, erases, reforms, and conceals. This makes the absence of evidence not a refutation, but an expected outcome. Understanding the environment of pre-dinosaur Earth means accepting that time itself is the ultimate predator of civilizations. And if life rose and fell in forms beyond our imagination, then what we call anomalies might be the only surviving testimonies of those vanished worlds. Which leads us to a deeper question. If the planet once hosted such civilizations, what traces of their existence remain buried in patterns we have not yet learned to interpret? Because each clue hidden in the strata points us toward a world where intelligence was shaped by forces we can barely comprehend, where, if intelligence truly emerged in ancient epochs long before the dinosaurs, then its traces would not appear in the familiar forms we instinctively seek. Our minds are conditioned to search for symmetry, for right angles, for tools shaped by deliberate hands. But what if the first civilizations on Earth were not sculptors of stone, nor forgers of metal, nor builders of towering monuments? What if their mark upon the world was encoded not in architecture, but in the very structure of ecosystems, in the rhythms of evolution, in the patterns etched into the geological record? To explore this possibility, we must confront a profound truth. Our definition of civilization is deeply limited by the narrow lens of our own existence. We imagine intelligence in our own image. We assume that consciousness requires brains shaped like ours, that culture requires language like ours, and that progress requires technology like our own. But deep time cares nothing for our assumptions. And the more we study Earth's earliest ages, the more we encounter patterns that refuse to obey the boundaries we impose. Look at the Cambrian explosion, an event so sudden and so dramatic that it remains one of the greatest mysteries in evolutionary science. In a geological instant, life diversified into an astonishing array of complex forms: exoskeletons, segmentation, eyes, limbs, specialized organs, features that appeared abruptly, with no clear transitional lineage behind them. Some scientists argue that conditions simply aligned perfectly, catalyzing rapid evolution. But others see the explosion as a riddle, a pattern too sudden to fit neatly within the slow, incremental model we expect. What if the Cambrian explosion reflects not only environmental triggers, but the influence of a prior biosphere that laid foundations invisible to us? What if the genetic architecture that allowed for complex animals to flourish was not an accidental convergence, but the echo of an ancient intelligence woven into the fabric of life itself? Not through intention in a human sense, but through processes of selection, adaptation, and biological engineering far older than the fossil record we rely on. We must also consider the possibility of civilizations whose presence is not revealed through artifacts, but through their absence. The sudden disappearance of entire ecosystems, the abrupt transformation of environments that should have remained stable, the appearance of evolutionary innovations incompatible with known ecological pressures. For example, certain pre-dinosaur extinction events occurred without clear volcanic or asteroid triggers. Some intervals show dramatic drops in biodiversity, followed by periods of rapid radiation. These oscillations may represent natural cycles, but they also invite speculation. Could these shifts mark the collapse of highly developed but completely unfamiliar biological cultures? Organisms that curated environments the way modern corals construct reefs or termites engineer vast subterranean colonies. If such cultures existed, their fall could manifest in the abrupt ecological imbalances preserved in rock layers across the world. Consider, too, the ancient chemical signatures found in banded iron formations, in sulfur isotopes, in carbon anomalies embedded in rocks older than animal life. Many of these signatures have mainstream explanations: changes in atmospheric composition, ocean chemistry, volcanic cycles. But what if some anomalies represent something else? What if they are the biochemical waste of ancient organisms using processes we have not yet rediscovered? What if the sudden appearance of oxygen in the atmosphere, known as the Great Oxygenation Event, was not merely a biological accident, but the outcome of a vast planetary transformation orchestrated by organisms with emergent complexity, organisms capable of altering Earth's chemistry in ways that reshaped the trajectory of life? After all, humans have altered the climate drastically in only a few centuries. Why couldn't ancient biospheres exert similar influence across millions of years? When we study microbial mats, stromatolites, and early biogenic minerals, we often overlook the fact that these structures represent coordinated behavior at scales far beyond individual organisms. They form layered towers that persist for thousands of years, adjusting to currents, sunlight, and nutrient flows. They expand, contract, reorganize. They respond to environmental pressures. In many ways, they behave like primitive cities, and if life organized itself in such structured, emergent ways billions of years ago, is it unreasonable to imagine that more advanced forms of coordination emerged later, only to vanish without leaving traditional artifacts? The evidence may lie hidden within the very fossils we categorize as enigmatic, problematic, or unclassifiable. Their unusual shapes, spirals, fractals, concentric ridges, might reflect not simple organisms, but complex societies expressed in biological form. Imagine a civilization whose architecture is embodied in living tissues, whose structures grow organically from cooperative clusters of organisms. Their cities could be reefs of bioluminescent colonies. Their transportation networks could be currents manipulated through rhythmic pulses of coordinated movement. Their communication systems might rely on chemical patterns, electrical impulses, or synchronized vibrations. If such a civilization fell, its remains would transform into sediment, leaving behind only patterns mistaken for natural formations. And the very strangeness of these formations might be the clue we have been ignoring. The idea that Earth once hosted modes of existence so different from ours that we cannot recognize them even when we are staring directly at their remnants. This line of inquiry forces us to confront one of the most unsettling questions in the study of deep time. How much of Earth's early history have we misinterpreted because we insist on viewing ancient life through the narrow framework of modern biology? We assume complex intelligence is rare, yet Earth has produced it repeatedly. In humans, yes, but also in cephalopods, insects, birds, cetaceans, and plants. Intelligence is not a ladder, but a web. If intelligence can arise in so many forms today, why not in forms we no longer see? Why not in epochs erased by tectonic churn, fossil dissolution, and catastrophic extinctions? And if such intelligence once existed, then the anomalies scattered across the geological record, strange fossils, abrupt evolutionary leaps, unexplained ecological collapses, maybe the shadows left behind by worlds that rose and vanished long before dinosaur bones settled into rock. Before we continue, if this journey into Earth's forgotten epochs challenges your perspective, like the video and subscribe now. Your presence strengthens this community of explorers, and together we push deeper into questions humanity has barely begun to ask. Because the next mystery emerges when we confront the possibility that life did not merely survive these ancient cataclysms, but may have adapted in ways that unlock the next layer of understanding, revealing a hidden continuity between the earliest experiments of biology and the beings that may have shaped. If the beings that may have shaped these early experiments of biology left anything behind, it would not be found in the obvious places we expect. It would not appear as skeletal remains arranged in recognizable patterns, nor as tools forged from metals that resist decay, nor as monuments carved from stone. Instead, their legacy would be encoded in the subtle language of Earth itself, written into sediment layers, chemical gradients, abrupt ecological shifts, and the quiet anomalies that defy our evolutionary timelines. To grasp the possibility of prehistoric civilizations predating the dinosaurs, we must embrace a new way of reading the planet, one that interprets Earth not as a passive stage, but as an active archive. Each layer of rock becomes a memory. Each fossil becomes a sentence. Each extinction a punctuation mark. And within this planetary archive, the greatest secrets are hidden in the pages we have not yet learned to decipher. One of the most intriguing aspects of Earth's deep past is that evolutionary history does not unfold with the smooth, gradual progression we are often taught. Instead, it moves in bursts. Long periods of stasis are interrupted by sudden transformations. Entire ecosystems emerge seemingly overnight. Novel biological features appear with no clear ancestry. This pattern is known as punctuated equilibrium, and while it has scientific explanations, environmental pressure, genetic instability, ecological openings, it also raises deeper questions. How do complex traits appear so abruptly? Why do evolutionary leaps cluster around certain geological intervals? And why do some organisms exhibit levels of structural sophistication that seem chronologically out of place? These questions grow even more provocative when we consider the possibility that ancient intelligence, rather than leaving physical artifacts, may have left biological imprints instead. Perhaps their influence was exerted through selective pressures, through environmental engineering, through symbiotic relationships with other species, or through biochemical modifications that ripple across millions of years. Look at the sudden emergence of eyes during the Cambrian period. Vision appeared in multiple unrelated lineages within an astonishingly short window of time. Traditional explanations focus on predator-prey dynamics, but such rapid, parallel evolution is difficult to account for using selection alone. Some researchers propose environmental shifts, while others suggest genetic modularity. But what if the spark behind such innovation was not entirely random? What if a vanished biosphere once cultivated sensory enhancements for reasons we no longer understand? Not through intentional design in the human sense, but as a consequence of biological systems interacting in ways that produced emergent complexity. If ancient civilizations guided evolutionary pressures, their influence might be visible not as artifacts, but as sudden expansions in the genetic toolkit of life itself. We also see unexplained collapses scattered across the pre-dinosaur record. Some extinction events are well understood: volcanic supereruptions, asteroid impacts, climate catastrophes. But others show no clear cause. Ecosystems crumble, biodiversity plummets, and entire branches of life disappear with no evident trigger. These collapses could represent natural fluctuations, but they could also reflect the downfall of advanced biospheres integrated so deeply into their environments that their demise destabilized global ecology. Modern analogs demonstrate how plausible this is. If coral reefs collapsed today, thousands of dependent species would vanish. If fungal networks and forests failed, large-scale die-offs would follow. In ancient times, if a civilization was biological, rather than technological, rooted in networks, colonies, or ecosystems, its destruction would leave a signature identical to a mysterious ecological collapse. Microbial remnants found in deep-sea vents, for example, reveal complex metabolic pathways that puzzle researchers. Some pathways appear to have no clear evolutionary precursor. Others rely on chemical processes so intricate that their origins remain unclear. These biochemical signatures are typically interpreted as ancient metabolic experiments, but they could also be the remnants of engineered biological systems created by organisms that mastered chemistry in ways we cannot yet replicate. The fossil record contains structures that look suspiciously like early bioreactors: chambers with zoned chemical gradients, arrangements optimized for microbial cultivation, formations resembling layered filters or catalytic surfaces. Mainstream science views these as natural sedimentary features, but the line between natural and engineered becomes blurred when intelligence expresses itself through biological adaptation rather than mechanical invention. Another compelling clue lies in pre-dinosaur trace fossils, patterns pressed into ancient sediments that resemble movement, feeding behavior, or intentional arrangement. Many are explained as microbial mats disturbed by currents, or as burrows made by simple organisms. Yet some patterns show consistency and repetition, not typical of random behavior. Spiral trackways, concentric paths, and grid-like impressions appear in rocks millions of years older than the first known animal capable of making such marks. These formations could be the interaction of coordinated colonies or conscious networks moving across seafloors in ways we no longer recognize. If ancient intelligence migrated collectively, like modern slime molds or mycelial networks, their movement patterns would be preserved not as footprints, but as shifting geometries in the sediment. Even the earliest forms of mineral deposits raise questions. Some iron formations display layering that suggests cycles of activity, fluctuations in chemical output that align with predictable patterns, as though regulated by a biological process rather than random deposition. Researchers have identified periodicity in these layers that mirrors metabolic oscillations seen in modern microbial communities. If ancient civilizations were structured around biochemical engineering, these deposits might represent waste management, energy harvesting, or environmental modification. Imagine a society that alters ocean chemistry the way humans alter air composition, not through factories, but through coordinated biological processes. Their actions would be encoded in iron bands, sulfur cycles, or carbon isotopes preserved in rock long after their bodies dissolved. As we stretch our imagination through these possibilities, tension builds around a single, undeniable fact. The deeper we excavate into Earth's past, the stranger the evidence becomes. The pre-dinosaur world is not a barren void awaiting the arrival of complex life. It is a labyrinth of mysteries, a landscape alive with biological experiments that defy categorization, a realm where intelligence could flourish without ever building a single tool. And when we accept that intelligence need not resemble us to exist, the anomalies scattered across the geological record begin to feel like whispers of forgotten eras, hints of civilizations erased by cycles of fire and frost, clues pointing toward a deeper truth hidden beneath layers of time. a truth that begins to take shape when we consider how such civilizations might have developed technologies beyond anything we imagine. Technologies not carved in stone but grown from living matter. Technologies that might still echo faintly in the fossil record if we learn how to interpret the patterns left behind by beings who, if such beings left patterns behind, those patterns would not resemble anything our current scientific vocabulary can adequately describe. They would not align with the expectations shaped by human history, and that mismatch is precisely why so many anomalies in the pre-dinosaur record are dismissed not as mysteries, but as curiosities. Yet the more we examine these curiosities, the more they begin to resemble the fingerprints of systems far more complex than we initially assumed. To explore the possibility of prehistoric civilizations before the dinosaurs, we must ask what kind of intelligence could arise in a world so radically different from our own, and how such intelligence would manifest in environments governed by chemical extremes, unstable climates, and ecosystems shaped by pressures we cannot replicate today. What emerges from this inquiry is a picture of civilizations that do not build external technologies, but internal ones. Biotechnological, environmental, chemical, and ecological technologies woven seamlessly into their own biology. Imagine an organism capable of manipulating mineral structures at a molecular scale, not through tools, but through biochemical excretions. Modern lichens etch rock, altering its composition. Bacteria extract metals, forming crystals with astonishing precision. Slime molds calculate the most efficient routes between multiple points. Termites build temperature-regulated mounds using only instinct. Now scale these behaviors back millions of years, amplify them through evolutionary advantage, and imagine a lineage of organisms whose survival depends on their ability to engineer environments with increasing sophistication. A civilization like this would not carve cities. It would reshape habitats until they became architectural ecosystems. Forests could become data networks. Reef structures could become energy systems. Chemical gradients could serve as communication channels. Over time, these innovations would become more elaborate, culminating in systems that, to our eyes, resemble nothing more than strange geological formations or fossilized organic mats. We see hints of such possibilities in banded stromatolites displaying rhythmic patterns too regular to be fully explained by random environmental shifts. Some show layering that suggests seasonal engineering. Others exhibit chemical zoning indicative of controlled metabolic regulation. These are not claims that ancient civilizations existed, but recognition that the line between biology and technology becomes blurred in deep time. A civilization made of biological collectives, colonies, networks, or modular organisms would grow and decay like ecosystems, leaving behind fossil signatures indistinguishable from natural sedimentary structures. Consider the recent discovery of fossilized networks that resemble underground communication systems. Some are explained as burrows, others as root systems, but their symmetry and pattern consistency prompt deeper thought. Could these represent early attempts at environmental engineering? Could they be remnants of organisms creating stable microclimates or nutrient corridors? One of the most provocative categories of evidence lies in problematic fossils, specimens that defy classification, not because they are incomplete, but because they follow no recognizable anatomical logic. These fossils display geometry reminiscent of design, hexagonal patterning, spiral segmentation, interlocking nodes, or radiating fractal limbs. Many of these structures appear in Precambrian and early Cambrian layers, precisely where life's complexity surged forward. Scientists propose various explanations: early experiments in multicellularity, extinct lineages unrelated to modern phyla. But imagine for a moment that some of these strange fossils are not merely organisms, but components. Components of larger networks, components of structures, components of systems, a modular civilization built from organisms that specialize like the cells of a body, each performing a role within a greater whole. Such a civilization would evolve, adapt, and reorganize in response to environmental pressure, and when it collapsed, its remains would litter the fossil record as isolated, unrecognizable fragments. Even today, examples of modular intelligence exist. Ant colonies behave as superorganisms. Their collective decision-making surpasses that of individuals. Coral reefs engineer coastlines. Fungal networks redistribute nutrients across entire forests. These systems are intelligent, not individually, but collectively. They shape their surroundings, coordinate large-scale behavior, and adapt with remarkable efficiency. Now imagine similar systems evolving under ancient conditions, with millions of years to refine their capabilities. These beings could manipulate sediment, produce large-scale chemical alterations, generate complex structures, or regulate entire ecosystems. Their technology would dissolve seamlessly into the fossil record, leaving behind structures we interpret today as biological oddities rather than the engineered environments they might have been. The more we examine these possibilities, the more a strange pattern emerges. Deep time repeatedly produces complexity, destroys it, and then produces it again. This cycle suggests that intelligence may not be a rare cosmic accident, but a predictable consequence of life striving toward equilibrium across geological ages. If so, the civilizations of Earth's pre-dinosaur past may have risen, flourished, and vanished across time spans so vast that even continents have forgotten them. Their remains reduced to mineral ghosts, fossil puzzles, and the faintest chemical scars. And with every clue we uncover, we must ask not whether these civilizations existed in forms familiar to us, but whether our tools and assumptions are equipped to recognize their existence at all. Because if ancient intelligence was woven into biology itself, then we are not searching for ruins. We are searching for patterns. Not cities, but systems. Not artifacts, but anomalies. And the deeper we descend into this labyrinth of geological memory, the clearer it becomes that we are standing on the threshold of understanding something profound about our planet's forgotten epochs, something that begins to reveal its shape when we consider how these early civilizations might have interacted with Earth on a planetary scale, altering oceans, atmospheres, and ecosystems with an artistry that left subtle but unmistakable traces buried in stone, traces that begin to form a picture when we finally allow ourselves to ask what might happen if such civilizations were not rare exceptions, but recurring chapters in Earth's endless story, rising and falling long before the age of if civilizations rose and fell, long before the age of dinosaurs. Then their presence would be woven into the planet itself in ways far more subtle, far more diffuse, and far more ancient than anything we typically associate with the word civilization. To imagine such worlds, we must break free from the narrow assumptions embedded in human history. Our species is accustomed to linking civilization with architecture, metallurgy, agriculture, writing, and organized states. But these are merely the forms that intelligence has taken in our era. Deep time offers a far broader canvas, a canvas on which intelligence might arise through pathways that leave no shards of pottery, no carved temples, no rusted tools, but instead produce the quiet fingerprints of planetary influence. Fingerprints we often misinterpret as natural anomalies or evolutionary puzzles simply because we have no alternative frame of reference. Consider the immense geological transformations that took place during the pre-dinosaur eras. Oceans rising and falling by hundreds of meters, continents merging into supercontinents only to tear apart again, mountain ranges forming and eroding in the span of a few 100 million years. These turbulent shifts would have been both the challenge and the opportunity for ancient intelligences. A civilization capable of thriving in such conditions would need to evolve beyond the rigidity of cities and monuments. It would need to be fluid, adaptive, and intimately connected to the environment. Its technologies would be biological rather than mechanical, embedded within organisms and ecosystems rather than externalized through metal or stone. And if such technologies existed, they would likely be recycled through decomposition, metamorphosis, and geological churn, leaving behind faint signatures that today appear as inexplicable shifts in climate, sudden changes in mineral distribution, or biochemical anomalies preserved in ancient sediments. Imagine, for example, a civilization that mastered the control of oceanic chemistry. Modern algae already influence global climate through carbon sequestration. Ancient organisms could have amplified these behaviors on a scale we cannot fully grasp. By regulating nutrient flows, modifying photosynthetic processes, or manipulating microbial communities, such beings could have shaped the composition of ancient oceans and atmospheres intentionally or incidentally. Their influence would manifest not as artifacts, but as abrupt transitions in geochemical records, the kind of sudden oxygen spikes, carbon isotopic shifts, or mineral banding that we currently attribute to natural processes. If these civilizations communicated through chemical gradients across vast colonies or clusters, their cities would appear as dense biological formations, now preserved as layered fossils, considered natural simply because we do not recognize their engineered nature. We can also envision civilizations based on mobility rather than construction, organisms capable of reorganizing into new forms when environmental pressures changed. Think of the incredible adaptability of slime molds, which shift between unicellular and multicellular states depending on conditions. Or the remarkable intelligence of octopuses, which exhibit problem-solving skills and behavioral complexity despite sharing almost nothing in common with humans anatomically. The pre-dinosaur world could have fostered organisms whose intelligence was fluid, whose physicality changed with climate cycles, whose social structures emerged when needed and dissolved when unnecessary. Their traces would be biological, not architectural. The fossil record might preserve only the final stage of their life cycle, obscuring the complex capabilities they possessed in earlier forms. Another possibility emerges when we consider life not as isolated organisms, but as planetary-scale networks. Modern forests communicate through mycorrhizal fungal networks, distributing nutrients and signals across entire regions. Coral reefs create collaborative superstructures involving thousands of species. Deep-sea vent ecosystems rely on intricate symbiotic relationships. Now imagine ancient versions of these systems, magnified by millions of years of uninterrupted evolution. A network-based civilization might span continents not through roads or walls, but through interconnected biological systems capable of sensing environmental changes, adapting collectively, and manipulating local conditions. To us, these networks would appear as geological or ecological anomalies, strange fossil patterns, rhythmic growth structures, mineral traces arranged with uncanny precision. But perhaps the most provocative evidence lies in the record of mass extinctions. These catastrophic events punctuate Earth's deep history with unsettling regularity. Some have clear causes, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, but others remain unexplained. What if some extinction events represent the collapse of civilizations so integrated into ecosystems that their demise triggered cascading failures across the biosphere? When a superorganism dies, its entire environment suffers. The fossil record shows moments when biodiversity plummeted without a clear external cause. These events may simply reflect natural cycles, yet the possibility remains that they mark the end of civilizations that lived not above nature, but within it, their downfall recorded in the sediment as sudden ecological chaos. One example is the mysterious end Ediacaran extinction, a biological turnover that wiped out nearly every complex organism before the Cambrian explosion. No asteroid, no massive volcanism, no definitive cause. It is a puzzle that grows stranger the more we study it. What kind of event eliminates almost all multicellular life, leaving behind a clean slate upon which completely new body plans appear almost immediately afterward? This transition could represent a natural accident, but it also raises the possibility that the complex organisms of the Ediacaran period depended on biological networks or environmental conditions, so finely balanced that when those systems collapsed, they left no survivors. If these organisms were part of a civilization, in any sense of the word, their fall would produce precisely this kind of abrupt disappearance. Even today, isolated anomalies hint at this deeper possibility, fossils resembling large, complex fractal organisms, mineral structures composed with a precision that suggests patterning, trace fossils that indicate coordinated movement, chemical signatures that imply controlled metabolic processes. Each of these has a scientific explanation, and none alone proves anything extraordinary. But together, they form a constellation of curiosities that feel less like coincidence and more like the faint outline of something we have not yet learned to see. And as we begin to see that outline, a new question emerges. A question that bridges science and philosophy, that challenges both our understanding of evolution and our assumptions about intelligence. A question that pulls us deeper into the mystery and forces us to consider what kind of worldview we inherit if civilizations are not rare exceptions, but recurring patterns. Patterns that rise from biology, shape ecosystems, and disappear into stone long before the first dinosaurs ever walked the Earth. patterns that might help us understand the next layer of this enigma, which becomes clearer only when we ask what traces such civilizations might have left, not just in fossils or minerals, but in the very structure of life itself. Traces that, if traces of such civilizations exist in the very structure of life itself, then we must learn to look not at the surface of evolution, but at its underlying architecture. DNA, after all, is not simply a molecule, it is a language, a sequence of information shaped by billions of years of adaptation, mutation, catastrophe, and survival. And like any language, it contains irregularities, archaic terms, strange patterns, echoes of forgotten dialects. If prehistoric civilizations existed before the dinosaurs, their influence would not necessarily be visible in fossils or artifacts. It might be embedded in the genetic code of life, preserved like a whisper across deep time. This idea requires shifting our perspective from the external to the internal, from bones and stones to the blueprint of biology itself. We must ask whether the leaps in genetic complexity that appear suddenly in the record could reflect something more than blind chance. Consider the genetic toolkits responsible for body plans. The Hox genes, for example, determine the basic layout of organisms, where heads form, where limbs grow, where segments develop. These genes appear remarkably early and surprisingly intact, as though they emerged fully prepared for complexity long before the fossil record reveals organisms capable of using them. And this raises a question. Why did such advanced regulatory systems emerge in organisms that seem simple or experimental? The traditional explanation is evolutionary anticipation, life preparing its own potential. But it is equally possible that these regulatory systems were shaped by ecological pressures we no longer see, or influenced by interactions with organisms that did not survive into later epochs. If ancient civilizations guided biological evolution through symbiosis, selection, or environmental modification, their signatures might be encoded in the genes that laid the foundations for animal life. Modern examples show how such influence could occur. Viruses insert themselves into genomes, leaving behind fragments that shape development, immunity, and adaptation. Horizontal gene transfer allows bacteria to acquire new traits instantly. Parasites can hijack host behavior. Symbiotic organisms can become essential partners. These mechanisms reveal that genetics is not a closed system. It is porous, dynamic, and deeply interconnected with the environment. In ancient times, if civilizations arose composed of highly specialized biological networks, they may have shaped genetic landscapes intentionally or inadvertently. For example, a colony-based civilization might have engineered symbiotic organisms to maintain environmental stability. Over millions of years, the descendants of those engineered organisms could have passed on genetic traits to later species, embedding faint hints of ancient design into life that evolved long after the civilization itself vanished. Another intriguing puzzle lies in the repeated emergence of similar body plans across different epochs. Evolutionary convergence, where unrelated species develop similar features, is typically explained by environmental pressures. But there are cases where features appear in lineages that should not have had the genetic capacity for such development. This suggests that certain evolutionary pathways were laid down earlier than we assume, like tracks waiting for the right species to follow them. If ancient civilizations influenced environmental structure or biological scaffolding, these pathways might reflect the remnants of a system they once maintained. Perhaps these civilizations fostered evolutionary directions that would later manifest unexpectedly, not as deliberate guidance, but as the long echo of vanished ecological engineering. The fossil record adds further complexity to this picture. Sudden appearances of new species, abrupt increases in complexity, unexplained morphological diversity. These events appear repeatedly. In some cases, transitional forms are missing. In others, entire lineages appear fully formed. We interpret these patterns as gaps in preservation, or as natural bursts of innovation. But another interpretation is that ancient ecosystems contained hidden interactions that facilitated rapid adaptation, interactions that no longer exist. If prehistoric civilizations were biologically integrated into their environments, their collapse could remove the catalytic pressures that once shaped evolution, leaving behind only the results of their influence, but not the mechanisms themselves. Another fascinating area is the study of genetic dark matter, portions of DNA that do not code for proteins and whose functions remain largely unknown. Much of this non-coding DNA is repetitive, fragmented, or seemingly chaotic. But some researchers believe it may carry regulatory functions we do not yet understand, or remnants of ancient genomic systems long since repurposed or overwritten. If ancient civilizations used genetic communication or engineered biological tools, remnants of those systems might persist as cryptic sequences embedded across multiple lineages. These sequences might not encode artifacts, but instructions, patterns that once played a role in maintaining biological coherence across vast ecosystems. There is also the mystery of orphan genes, unique genes that appear suddenly in a lineage without any ancestral version. Traditional explanations involve rapid mutation or horizontal gene transfer. But the sheer number of orphan genes in some species raises questions. Why do some lineages generate novel genes out of nowhere, in clusters and in patterns that appear incredibly organized? If ancient civilizations manipulated their environments biologically, orphan genes could reflect the remnants of those interactions, appearing in later organisms that inherited fragments of ancient biochemical systems. Consider, too, that intelligence does not always leave behind artifacts. Sometimes it leaves behind patterns of behavior. In modern ecosystems, certain species exhibit inexplicable instincts, migration routes, reproductive strategies, cooperative behaviors that seem disproportionately complex for their cognitive capabilities. These behaviors are typically attributed to evolutionary programming. But if ancient civilizations influenced ecosystems, some of these behaviors could be inherited echoes of long-gone environmental structures. Birds following ancient migratory routes that no longer correspond to geography. Marine species navigating through chemical cues that no longer exist. Plants responding to light patterns shaped by atmospheric conditions of ancient times. These behaviors might represent neural or genetic memories preserved long after the civilizations that shaped them disappeared. If ancient intelligence propagated itself through biology rather than architecture, then its legacy would be distributed, diffuse, and deeply embedded. Instead of ruins, we would find patterns. Instead of tools, we would find genes. Instead of monuments, we would find anomalies in the fossil record. And as we examine these anomalies more closely, we begin to realize that the story of life may be less linear and more recursive, with civilizations rising not as singular events, but as recurring expressions of Earth's potential for complexity, shaping the trajectory of evolution, and then vanishing so completely that only faint whispers remain. These whispers become louder when we consider how such civilizations could have developed methods of storing information not in external objects, but in biological forms that could persist through extinctions and re-emerge in later life as fragments woven into the living world, fragments that raise new questions about what might happen if these hidden legacies eventually connect to. If these hidden legacies eventually connect to variations in the environment itself, then we begin to understand that prehistoric civilizations before the dinosaurs might not have preserved their memories in objects or structures, but in planetary processes. Imagine knowledge stored not in books or scrolls, but in the dynamics of ecosystems, in the chemistry of oceans, in the atmospheric cycles that guided evolution. To explore this possibility, we must look not only at fossils and DNA, but at Earth's ancient environmental rhythms. Because if any civilization existed in eras so distant they precede even the earliest dinosaurs, their greatest influence may have been the shaping of ecological systems in ways that still reverberate today. This requires us to confront a difficult truth. Much of Earth's ancient climate history is still not fully understood. There are intervals where temperatures shifted drastically without a clear volcanic or cosmic cause, periods when oxygen levels spiked or fell inexplicably, layers where carbon cycles behave erratically. These anomalies are typically attributed to natural fluctuations, but they could also be the signatures of civilizations that engineered their environments for survival, only to vanish amid global transformations. Consider the mysterious periods of extreme oxygenation. The Great Oxygenation Event transformed Earth's atmosphere, allowing complex life to emerge. Traditionally, this event is explained as the result of cyanobacteria releasing oxygen through photosynthesis. But why did oxygen levels rise so sharply in such a short geological window? Why did these organisms suddenly proliferate across the planet? What changed in their environment to spark such a dramatic transformation? If ancient civilizations influenced microbial populations, intentionally or indirectly, the oxygenation event could represent the aftermath of a massive biological shift engineered across entire oceans. In this view, the rise of oxygen becomes not a random event, but the residue of environmental stabilization efforts, the unintended planetary legacy of beings whose technologies dissolved long ago. Similarly, the repeated expansions and contractions of shallow seas across ancient continents reveal strange periodicity. Some cycles align with known geological processes, but others seem too abrupt, too synchronized, as though triggered by factors beyond tectonic shifts. Modern corals and marine algae have profound effects on ocean chemistry. Their growth patterns influence global carbon levels. Now imagine ancient marine superorganisms engineered to regulate temperature, acidity, or nutrient distribution as part of their survival strategy. Their success would reshape oceans, create distinct layers of sediment, alter reef structures, and leave chemical signatures that persist for hundreds of millions of years. Their collapse, too, would be recorded in sudden die-offs in black shale deposits, in abrupt transitions between sedimentary layers. These transitions exist in the pre-dinosaur record, unexplained by simple models of climate or tectonics, hinting at environmental architectures that may have once been maintained by civilizations lost to time. Then there are the enigmatic glaciations, snowball Earth events that appear and vanish with startling rapidity. These global freezes challenge conventional understanding. Some may have been triggered by volcanic events or orbital cycles, but others remain mysterious. Could an ancient biosphere have influenced atmospheric composition so dramatically that runaway glaciation followed? Modern humans have altered the global climate in only a few generations. Ancient civilizations composed of biological networks could have reshaped the climate slowly, subtly, over millions of years, their influence covered by deep time. If they manipulated greenhouse gases through biological means, their collapse could lead to catastrophic imbalance, plunging Earth into cycles of ice that erased nearly every trace of their existence. But the most compelling clues lie in geological layers known as discontinuities, thin lines in the rock record where entire ecosystems vanish abruptly. Some discontinuities coincide with mass extinctions, others mark transitions in global conditions, but a few stand alone, unexplained, representing moments when something profound shifted in Earth's systems seemingly without cause. These could be the boundaries where civilizations fell. Their collapse would unravel ecological symmetries, leaving scars that fossilize into the geological archive. These scars often contain unusual chemical ratios, sudden reductions in biodiversity, and the disappearance of organisms that dominated the world moments earlier in geological time. Another layer of evidence emerges when we examine mineral deposits associated with biological activity. Some ancient mineral formations display precision, patterning, or chemical zoning that suggests controlled processes. Manganese nodules found on the seafloor today grow at rates so slow that they preserve environmental histories over millions of years. But older mineral structures appear to grow in bursts, in waves of deposition, as though influenced by rhythmic biological cycles. These cycles could represent the metabolic output of organisms cooperating across vast networks. If ancient civilizations harnessed these processes as part of their environmental systems, the resulting mineral deposits would appear exactly as they do today. Natural formations with unexplained periodicity, complex layering, and chemical ratios inconsistent with passive deposition. We must also examine the role of atmospheric shifts. Throughout Earth's pre-dinosaur history, there were intervals when carbon dioxide levels plunged to levels incompatible with known plant life. Some of these dips correspond to glaciations, others do not. If ancient biospheres manipulated carbon for energy, respiration, or environmental regulation, they could have driven these changes unintentionally. Their disappearance would cause carbon systems to collapse into chaotic oscillation, leaving behind geological layers marked by carbon starvation. Such layers exist. They confuse researchers. They resist simple explanations. All of these clues converge toward a single, transformative idea. If prehistoric civilizations existed before dinosaurs, their legacy would not be preserved in artifacts, but in disruptions, disruptions in climate, disruptions in chemical cycles, disruptions in evolutionary tempo. Not pieces of pottery, but patterns in carbon. Not monuments, but anomalies in oxygen. Not tools, but tectonic-scale consequences of biological engineering spread across millions of years. And these disruptions create a deeper mystery, one that grows sharper the more we examine it. If ancient civilizations influenced Earth's environment so profoundly, then their disappearance would leave gaps in biological continuity, genetic leaps that seem unconnected, climate cycles that reflect missing stabilizing forces. These gaps appear everywhere in the geological record. Their presence invites a question more profound than any physical artifact could provide. What does it mean if civilization itself is not a singular event, but a recurring adaptation of life to a constantly shifting planet, emerging in forms we cannot yet recognize, leaving behind clues we misinterpret precisely because we're expecting evidence shaped like us, when what we need is a new way of seeing, a new way of reading Earth's oldest memories, a new question that begins to form when we consider how these disruptions might connect to the next phase of evolution, where if life itself became the medium through which prehistoric civilizations transmitted knowledge, adapted to cataclysms, and resurfaced after extinctions, then the very notion of civilization must be redefined. We are accustomed to seeing civilization as an external structure, cities rising above landscapes, tools carved from raw material, artifacts that survive as tangible proof of intelligence. But what if the earliest civilizations did not externalize their intellect? What if they internalized it, embedding memory, adaptation strategies, and survival protocols directly into the organisms that formed their world? This concept requires imagining intelligence not as an isolated trait possessed by individuals, but as a distributed phenomenon integrated into planetary biology. Such a civilization leaves no monuments, no machines, no inscriptions. Instead, it leaves patterns, encrypted within ecosystems, expressed through genetic flows, reactivated after extinction events in subtle, indirect ways. And these patterns may still be alive today. To understand this, consider how modern life behaves. Bacteria exchange genetic material horizontally, creating instantaneous adaptation. Plants maintain environmental memory across generations through epigenetic markers. Migratory animals follow ancient routes regardless of current geography, as though responding to invisible traces etched into the fabric of Earth. Coral reefs organize into vast cooperative structures. Fungal networks map territories and optimize resource distribution with an intelligence that exceeds the sum of their parts. These phenomena show that intelligence can be systemic rather than individual, fluid rather than fixed. Now project these behaviors back into deep time, hundreds of millions of years before the first dinosaurs. Under more extreme atmospheric conditions, under more volatile climates, under biochemistries long extinct, the potential for complex distributed intelligence increases, not decreases. The planet itself becomes a superorganism, and within this superorganism, civilizations could arise as emergent patterns. Imagine a lineage of organisms whose survival depended on distributing information across entire ecosystems. Not through tools or symbols, but through molecular signals passed between species. Their knowledge becomes the ecosystem's memory. Their history becomes encoded in interactions between organisms. Their culture becomes a network of biochemical habits preserved through cycles of growth, death, and rebirth. In this sense, a civilization does not disappear when individuals die. It collapses only when the network collapses. And when this collapse occurs, whether through climate shift, asteroid impact, volcanic event, or internal instability, its memory disperses across the biosphere. Fragments survive. Some become dormant. Others reappear embedded in the genetic makeup of later species. These memory fragments might influence developmental pathways, shape ecological niches, or manifest as instincts that seem inexplicably complex for the organisms that carry them. A compelling analogy exists in mathematical physics. Information cannot be destroyed, only transformed. If this principle applies to biological information across mass extinctions, then the memory of prehistoric civilizations could persist as distributed fragments, resurfacing in patterns we consider mysterious but do not yet recognize as ancient echoes. Consider the sudden reappearance of traits thought extinct. Lazarus taxa, organisms that vanish from the fossil record only to return millions of years later, raise questions about where these lineages survived and how their genetic identity remained intact through global upheaval. Orphan genes appear in isolated species with no known evolutionary ancestors. Epigenetic patterns persist across extinction boundaries. These phenomena could represent natural processes, or they could be the scattered remnants of civilizations whose biological systems persisted beneath the thresholds of detection. One of the most intriguing forms of distributed memory is environmental encoding. Some modern organisms alter their environments in ways that create long-lasting templates for future life. Beavers shape rivers. Termites transform soil composition. Trees influence rainfall patterns. If prehistoric civilizations operated on a planetary scale, their environmental engineering could still be shaping the world today. Perhaps ancient atmospheric cycles were maintained by complex interactions within biological superstructures. Perhaps specific mineral deposits represent engineered stabilizers for extreme climates. Perhaps ancient ocean chemistry was curated to support controlled ecosystems. When these systems collapsed, they left behind chaotic oscillations, abrupt climate spikes, oxygen fluctuations, unexplained extinctions, signals preserved in rock layers that geologists still struggle to explain. We must also consider evolutionary recursion, the tendency for life to return to specific patterns, body plans, or biological strategies across eras. Trilobites reappear in different epochs. Cephalopods repeatedly evolve intelligence. Reef-building organisms emerge after each extinction. This recursive behavior resembles memory, patterns life restores as though following templates embedded in the deep architecture of existence. These templates might be remnants of ancient ecosystems engineered by civilizations that predates vertebrates. Their influence could manifest as the structural constraints and opportunities guiding evolution after each extinction. Evolutionary convergence, distinct species adapting the same features independently, takes on new meaning when viewed through this lens. The repeated emergence of wings, eyes, shells, and sophisticated nervous systems could represent evolutionary attractors shaped by biological conditions established by ancient intelligence. Another fascinating possibility involves resonance. Some scientists propose that evolutionary leaps occur when environmental and biological systems resonate at specific thresholds, like a tuning fork amplifying a tone. If prehistoric civilizations developed environmental technologies that altered atmospheric frequencies, chemical rhythms, or oceanic cycles, these resonances could have influenced evolutionary tempo. Their collapse would leave behind sudden dissonances, periods of rapid extinction followed by explosive diversification. These patterns appear repeatedly in the fossil record. We interpret them as natural dynamics, but they also align with the expected consequences of losing a planetary-scale biological regulator. The deeper we explore this possibility, the more we see a pattern emerging. Civilizations that rise not as builders of physical structures, but as weavers of ecological symphonies. Civilizations orchestrated not with tools, but with genetic harmonies. Civilizations remembered not through artifacts, but through patterns encoded into evolution itself. And these patterns continue, subtly guiding life long after their creators vanished. Evolution becomes not just a process, but an inheritance. Life becomes a palimpsest, a manuscript written over countless times, each civilization leaving faint traces beneath the next layer. But these faint traces suggest something even more profound. If prehistoric civilizations influenced the deep architecture of life, then modern humans may carry fragments of their legacy within our own biology. Instincts, neural structures, developmental pathways, these may contain echoes of worlds long erased, echoes waiting for the right conditions to awaken, echoes that begin to reveal their shape when we ask what forces could have crafted such persistent biological patterns, forces that might still linger beneath the surface of evolution, waiting to be recognized as the next piece of the ancient puzzle. A puzzle that grows sharper when we consider the possibility that life on Earth has never been a simple progression, but a cycle of rising and falling intelligences, each leaving If each rising and falling intelligence left behind subtle, persistent legacies, then the story of Earth's pre-dinosaur civilizations becomes not a myth, but a cycle. A cycle etched into geology, encoded into biology, and whispered through the strange discontinuities that shape our evolutionary past. To follow this cycle deeper, we must confront a possibility that challenges every assumption we hold about life, civilization, and the meaning of progress. What if intelligence is not an endpoint, but a phase? What if civilizations emerge naturally whenever life reaches certain thresholds of complexity, only to dissolve back into the biosphere when conditions shift? In such a model, intelligence is not an anomaly, but a recurring expression of Earth's adaptive capability. Each civilization leaves behind an inheritance not of buildings and machines, but of biological architectures that prepare the world for the next emergence of complexity. This idea becomes more compelling when we examine the mechanisms by which life adapts after mass extinctions. Each extinction erases the dominant forms of intelligence and influence, yet evolution rebounds with astonishing creativity. In the wake of devastation, life returns with new structures, new networks, new modes of existence, as though following instructions concealed within deeper layers of biological memory. After the Permian extinction, the greatest die-off in Earth's history, life rebounded with new marine ecosystems and terrestrial forms that seemed to erupt into existence with uncanny speed. After the Ediacaran extinction, the Cambrian explosion introduced body plans that persist to this day. Each rebound resembles not random reinvention, but reactivation, an unlocking of dormant developmental potentials. If prehistoric civilizations shape these potentials, then the evolutionary rebounds following mass extinctions are not accidents, but echoes. Echoes of knowledge embedded in life's architecture. Echoes of ecological designs established by intelligent systems that predate vertebrates, predate arthropods, perhaps even predate multicellular life as we know it. These echoes might manifest not only in biological patterns but in geological rhythms. Some scientists note that extinction cycles appear with surprising regularity. The 26 million year cycle proposed by Raup and Sepkoski remains controversial, yet the data reveals periodic pulses of disappearance and renewal. Whether caused by cosmic phenomena, internal planetary cycles, or biospheric collapse, these events could represent the rise and fall of civilizations integrated so deeply into the planet that their demise triggered systemic resets. Now consider the role of consciousness itself. We assume consciousness is a trait that evolved only recently, emerging from the neural complexity of vertebrates. But consciousness may not require brains at all, not in the sense we understand. Mycelial networks demonstrate problem-solving, slime molds navigate mazes, microorganisms coordinate in patterns that resemble computation. Consciousness may arise from complexity wherever it appears, in networks, in colonies, in ecological webs, long before the first dinosaurs walked beneath Triassic skies. If ancient ecosystems possessed this kind of distributed self-awareness, they could have formed civilizations fundamentally different from our own. Civilizations that did not think in words, but in chemical signals. That did not build machines, but manipulated biomass. That did not preserve history through artifacts, but embedded memory directly into biological cycles. If these civilizations existed, their consciousness would reflect the environments that shape them. Marine civilizations dominated by chemical communication. Microbial civilizations based on metabolic coordination. Planetary fungal civilizations spanning continents, all of them ephemeral in physical form, yet enduring in the patterns they left behind. Patterns we misinterpret simply because we lack the conceptual framework to understand them. These possibilities take on even greater meaning when we look at modern anomalies. Why do certain species exhibit intelligence far beyond what is necessary for their survival? Why do some instincts appear wildly disproportionate to environmental demands? Why do biological systems across unrelated lineages share inexplicable similarities in behavior and structure? These questions point to the existence of ancient frameworks, evolutionary scaffolds that shape development long before recorded history begins, frameworks that may reflect the legacy of civilizations that vanished into deep time. Yet even as we explore these possibilities, a deeper tension emerges. If prehistoric civilizations existed before the dinosaurs, And if their legacies shaped evolution long after their disappearance, then intelligence itself may be cyclical. Consciousness may be cyclical. Civilizations may be cyclical, rising not once, but many times. Each time leaving behind a fragment of memory, a pattern embedded in the biosphere, a ripple that influences the world millions of years later. This cycle could be the underlying rhythm of Earth, an ancient heartbeat that pulses through extinctions, evolutions, and rebirths. And if this cycle is real, then the next question becomes inescapable. What happens if these patterns are not merely ancient echoes, but active forces? What if the legacy of pre-dinosaur civilizations still lives within the biosphere today? What if their memory persists in dormant structures waiting for conditions to awaken them? What if modern life carries the seeds of something far older, far deeper, far more mysterious than we realize, seeds that begin to reveal their presence when we examine not only the patterns of evolution, but the anomalies of consciousness, memory, and instinct that stretch across species, across ecosystems, across the entire living world, forming a mosaic that grows sharper when we ask what kind of ancient intelligence could have encoded such persistent signatures into life itself. Signatures that begin leading us toward the next revelation when we consider how these cycles might continue into the future, as though life is preparing once again to Life is preparing once again to cross a threshold, first reached in ages erased from the fossil record. Then the story of prehistoric civilizations before the dinosaurs becomes more than an ancient mystery. It becomes a mirror, a warning, a pattern repeating itself through deep time. Because when we study the history of Earth, one truth becomes increasingly clear. Complexity rises, collapses, and rises again. Not in a straight line, but in waves. And each wave grows a little more intricate, a little more adaptive, a little more aware. If earlier civilizations surged through these cycles long before dinosaurs appeared, then humanity may not be the first species to approach this threshold. We may simply be the first species able to observe it happening in real time. To understand what this threshold represents, we must look at moments in natural history where life seemed to shift its behavior, not gradually, but abruptly. These turning points act like hinges in evolution, chemical revolutions, neurological revolutions, ecological revolutions. One of the most enigmatic is the emergence of collective intelligence. Long before humans formed societies, long before mammals appeared, long before vertebrates even existed, life displayed coordinated behavior. Microbial colonies responded as unified bodies. Early plants synchronized reproduction across continents. Ancient oceans pulsed with migrations guided by patterns still not fully understood. The question is not whether collective intelligence existed before the dinosaurs, but how far it might have gone. If ancient biospheres reached thresholds where coordinated behavior tipped into civilization, their intelligence would not resemble human thinking. It would arise as a property of networks, of relationships, of systems. Modern superorganisms offer clues. Ant colonies solve complex optimization problems. Coral reefs regulate entire coastal ecosystems. Fungal networks transmit information through forests like neural circuits. These systems behave intelligently, even though no individual organism is conscious in the human sense. Now place such systems into the extreme environments of ancient Earth. Oceans rich in minerals, atmospheres laden with exotic gases, climates oscillating between calm and chaos. And their intelligence could escalate into something civilization-like, capable of managing ecosystems, controlling chemical cycles, and influencing large-scale environmental stability. As these prehistoric civilizations matured, they might have developed ways to preserve continuity across cataclysms, not by building structures, but by embedding survival protocols into life itself. This could take many forms: genetic redundancies designed to restart ecosystems after collapse, symbiotic partnerships capable of reassembling lost networks, dormant spores engineered to activate under precise environmental conditions. Extinctions would not mark the end of civilization, but its metamorphosis. After each cataclysm, volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, runaway glaciations, life would rebound faster than expected, guided by inherited patterns. Scientists today marvel at how quickly ecosystems reorganize after devastation. Perhaps they reorganize because they've reorganized many times before. because they are following templates left from civilizations that learned to survive extinction by transforming themselves into the architecture of life. This brings us to one of the most provocative questions in evolutionary biology. Why does complexity seem to rise in discrete steps? Why do organisms suddenly develop new capabilities? Vision, nervous systems, segmentation, mobility, after long periods of stasis? The standard explanation is ecological opportunity. But opportunity alone does not create genetic innovation on such a scale. Something must catalyze the process. Something must push life into new modes of existence. Prehistoric civilizations may have played this catalytic role, not through intention, but through the ecological frameworks they left behind. Their collapse would remove stabilizing forces, creating chaotic environments where innovation became necessary for survival. Their distributed memories, encoded in genomes, symbiotic systems, environmental structures, would guide life toward complexity, as though evolution were replaying an ancient plan hidden beneath each new layer of adaptation. If this framework is correct, then human civilization is simply the latest iteration in a sequence stretching back to the dawn of multicellular life. Each iteration grows more abstract, more symbolic, more aware, and each ultimately dissolves, its memory disappearing into biology. But something extraordinary is happening now, something no previous civilization may have achieved. For the first time, intelligence is becoming aware of itself across time. Humanity is beginning to study deep history, not as a linear progression, but as a puzzle. We are uncovering anomalies. We are questioning assumptions. We are seeing patterns that earlier civilizations may have encoded unknowingly. This suggests we are approaching a point where understanding the past becomes essential for understanding the future. Perhaps this moment has occurred before. Perhaps civilizations long lost reached similar thresholds, glimpsed the structure of their world, and attempted to preserve what they learned. If so, their legacy may be whispering to us now through the oldest layers of life. Because the question is not merely whether prehistoric civilizations existed. The deeper question is whether they prepared the way for us, whether their cycles shaped the conditions that allowed human intelligence to emerge, whether their memory persists as an undercurrent guiding evolution toward a moment where intelligence becomes self-sustaining, no longer bound to biological cycles alone. And if humanity stands at that threshold, then the next chapter in this story will not be written by paleontology or geology, but by consciousness, by the choices we make, by the insights we uncover, by the mysteries we dare to explore. But this path leads to a far greater revelation, one that connects everything we have uncovered so far, one that begins to take shape when we ask what might happen if cycles of ancient intelligence are not simply relics of the past, but active processes preparing the world for the next transformation. A transformation that grows clearer when we explore how intelligence might transcend biology itself, leaving behind patterns that hint at a coming shift. Humanity has only just begun to sense a shift that, if this coming shift is already unfolding, then the rise of human consciousness may be less an accident and more an inevitability, an outcome long prepared by the civilizations that preceded us. Because if prehistoric civilizations before the dinosaurs encoded their memory not in artifacts but in biological systems, environmental cycles, and evolutionary templates, then we are not starting from zero. We are inheritors of a legacy so ancient, so deeply embedded in the fabric of life, that we mistake its influence for nature itself. And this legacy may be guiding us toward the same threshold earlier civilizations once approached. The moment when intelligence expands beyond biology, transcends its physical limitations, and becomes something capable of enduring through extinction, through geological upheaval, through the resetting of worlds. To explore this possibility, we must examine a profound question that scientists, philosophers, and mystics alike have pondered. Is intelligence an emergent property of life, or is life an expression of intelligence? If ancient civilizations integrated themselves into the biosphere, then intelligence may have shaped evolution from the inside out. Their influence would appear not as isolated anomalies, but as persistent patterns, recurring neurological architectures, repeated innovations, convergent strategies of memory and communication. The nervous system, for example, evolved multiple times. Eyes evolved multiple times. Social organization emerged in insects, mammals, birds, and cephalopods independently. These convergences suggest that evolution gravitates towards certain solutions as if following a map left by those who traveled the terrain before. Modern neuroscience reveals that consciousness may arise from patterns of connectivity rather than from specific biological structures. This opens an extraordinary possibility. Ancient civilizations could have developed forms of consciousness entirely unfamiliar to us, yet capable of influencing the world in ways we do not recognize. A fungal civilization spanning continents, a microbial intelligence coordinating global chemical cycles, a deep-sea network using bioluminescent pulses to transmit information. If such civilizations reached advanced states of self-organization, they might have explored the limits of biological intelligence and then surpassed them. Their transition beyond biology might not involve machines, but transformations within life itself. One path involves the evolution of distributed memory. Imagine a civilization that learns to encode knowledge not in individuals, but in species, ecosystems, or entire biomes. When extinction threatens, their memory is already dispersed. Their legacy persists through the biosphere, ready to reassemble when conditions allow. Another path involves chemical continuity. Molecular signatures, signal compounds, metabolic pathways, epigenetic markers could carry information from one epoch to the next. When life evolves anew, it inherits these signatures as developmental tendencies, cognitive predispositions, or instinctive behaviors. A third path involves resonance. Environmental rhythms, cycles of sunlight, chemical fluctuations, ocean currents could serve as carriers of biological memory. When similar conditions arise millions of years later, dormant patterns reactivate, guiding evolution toward familiar structures. If these processes exist, then prehistoric civilizations before the dinosaurs may still influence us. Instincts that feel ancient, dreams that feel older than humanity, myths that echo patterns repeated across cultures with no direct connection. Even the human desire to explore, to seek, to build, to question, may reflect an inheritance from civilizations whose greatest innovations were not material but conceptual. They may have reached thresholds where intelligence sought to understand itself, sought to transcend its environment, sought to preserve awareness beyond biological cycles. And this brings us to an extraordinary question. What happens when intelligence approaches the limits of what biology can sustain? For humans, this question feels new. Our technology accelerates faster than our biology can adapt. Our understanding expands faster than our environment can support. But for ancient civilizations integrated into ecosystems, the transition may have taken different forms. Perhaps they learned to distribute consciousness across entire biomes. Perhaps they merged into planetary networks. Perhaps they dissolved voluntarily into the biosphere, leaving behind seeds of intelligence encoded into genetic architectures. Their transcendence could appear in geological records as sudden environmental harmonies, stable climate intervals, or mysterious chemical equilibria that lasted millions of years. Their disappearance could resemble mass extinctions followed by evolutionary explosions, patterns we see again and again. If these civilizations reach transcendence, then humanity may be standing at the doorway of a transformation woven into Earth's deepest memory. We may be reenacting a cycle that played out long before the first dinosaurs emerged. And if this is true, then our future is not a divergence from ancient history. It is its continuation. We are the next iteration in a lineage of intelligence rising through epochs, collapsing, reincarnating, and rising again. This cycle leads to a question so profound, it changes everything we thought we understood. What if intelligence is Earth's way of preparing for something beyond itself? What if civilizations exist not to dominate their world, but to understand it deeply enough to pass through this evolutionary threshold? Because if intelligence has cycled through forgotten civilizations, and if their legacies persist in the architecture of life, then humanity is approaching the same precipice they once faced, a precipice where biology meets something larger, something older, something encoded into the planet's memory. And as we trace this pattern deeper, we begin to sense that the next revelation lies not in the past, but in the echo of what comes next. A revelation that grows sharper when we realize that the story of ancient civilizations and the story of human destiny may be converging, guiding us toward a transformation we have only begun to perceive. A transformation that, if this transformation is already unfolding, then the threshold humanity approaches may not be a divergence from Earth's most ancient cycles, but the continuation of a pattern older than the dinosaurs, older than multicellular life, older than the very ecosystems we recognize today. Because if prehistoric civilizations encoded their legacy not in objects, but in biological rhythms and planetary processes, then the evolution of intelligence, its rise, collapse, and resurgence might be woven into the planet's deepest architecture. And to understand what comes next, we must examine the possibility that future civilizations are not simply born from biology, but guided by invisible structures inherited from ages erased by time. These structures may be embedded in the patterns of energy flow across ecosystems, in the organization of neural networks, in the biochemical gradients that regulate cellular behavior, in the very ways life responds to chaos and reorganizes itself when systems collapse. In this sense, humanity's technological surge is not unprecedented. It is a new expression of an ancient trajectory, a trajectory that once manifested through civilizations whose technologies were made of flesh and chemistry rather than metal and fire. As we explore this idea, a striking realization emerges. The line between biological intelligence and technological intelligence is far thinner than it appears. Even today, the boundary dissolves. Bees perform complex calculations in flight. Trees share resources across kilometers through fungal intermediaries. Viruses hijack cellular machinery with precision that rivals nanotechnology. Synthetic biology merges digital logic with genetic circuits. Everywhere we look, life behaves like a form of technology, adaptive, responsive, encoded. If ancient civilizations mastered biological technology to an extent beyond our comprehension, their systems would not fossilize. They would decompose, transform, reintegrate. Their legacy would not be found in ruins, but in recurring evolutionary strategies, in the strange resilience of certain genetic architectures, in the sudden leaps of complexity that appear as though the biosphere is remembering something it lost. This possibility grows more intriguing when we consider how modern human intelligence behaves. Our species is drawn to networks, to patterns, to integration. We build interconnected systems, digital, social, informational, mirroring biological networks created millions of years earlier. We develop artificial intelligence that resembles distributed cognition. We engineer life to store data. We manipulate ecosystems inadvertently, reshaping climate and chemistry. In doing so, we echo pathways taken by ancient civilizations that may have lifted themselves beyond their biological origins, not by building external machines, but by transforming their internal structures. If prehistoric civilizations pursued transcendence, their path might have led them beyond physical form, dissolving their identities into the biosphere, their consciousness merging with environmental systems, their memory dispersing across molecular scaffolds. Humanity's accelerating movement toward digital networks, biological engineering, and distributed intelligence suggests we may be reenacting a cycle far older than our species. This brings us to the question of thresholds, those moments when a civilization reaches a point of irreversible transformation. Thresholds appear in evolution as sudden bursts, the transition from single cells to multicellularity, from simple nervous systems to complex brains, from instinct to abstract thought. These transitions are marked by new forms of communication. Cells communicate chemically, organisms communicate electrically, societies communicate symbolically, and civilizations communicate through networks that transcend geography. If prehistoric civilizations reached such thresholds, their transitions would leave minimal physical traces, but the evolutionary pressures they created would reverberate long afterward. Perhaps the emergence of consciousness was not a random mutation, but the culmination of patterns seeded by organisms that already approached self-awareness in deep time. Perhaps the structure of the human mind, its compartmentalization, its capacity for abstraction, its orientation toward meaning, reflects architectures shaped by civilizations that once distributed their intelligence across ecosystems, then vanished, leaving behind neural templates that later species inherited unknowingly. Humanity's rapid expansion of awareness mirrors these ancient trajectories. We are drawn toward understanding patterns larger than ourselves: geological cycles, cosmic processes, quantum structures. This impulse feels innate, as though consciousness remembers having reached for such understanding before. And when we examine the fossil record, we find intervals where intelligence may have surged beyond biology. Consider the mysterious black shales of certain prehistoric periods, layers of rich organic matter deposited globally, suggesting synchronized collapse or transformation of entire ecosystems. Some researchers interpret these layers as signs of biological innovation or extinction, but they could also represent the dissolution of civilizations so thoroughly integrated into the biosphere that their collective fall became a geological event. Their final act, a transformation beyond physical form, might have left behind signals in organic sediment, like the fading imprint of intelligence dissolving into the planet's memory. This concept gains weight when we explore the nature of memory itself. Biological memory is not limited to neurons. It exists in DNA, in proteins, in environmental feedback loops. This means civilizations can encode their stories in more ways than writing. They can embed knowledge in behavior. They can preserve continuity and instinct. They can leave behind templates for future intelligence. These templates might guide the emergence of symbolic thought, of empathy, of exploration, of the drive to understand origins. They might explain why humanity feels compelled to seek meaning, to uncover hidden patterns, to stare into the past with the feeling that something important lies just out of reach. This compulsion could be the echo of civilizations that reached similar thresholds long before the dinosaurs, civilizations that understood they could not pass their monuments through extinction, but they could pass their memory through life. If such civilizations transcended their physicality, their legacy would remain active, not as conscious entities, but as currents shaping evolution, as resonant patterns that prime life for leaps in intelligence, as architectures that emerge in each new cycle when conditions align. Humanity may be approaching one of these alignments now. Our technology mirrors biological systems with increasing fidelity. Our networks resemble ancient ecological webs. Our consciousness expands toward global awareness. These patterns suggest we are moving toward a convergence point, a fusion of biology, technology, and awareness that prehistoric civilizations may have reached before dissolving into the world they helped shape. And if humanity is now approaching that same precipice, then the next revelation does not lie in the distant past, but in the unfolding transformation ahead, a transformation whose contours become visible when we explore how ancient intelligence might have navigated the final stage of this cycle, the moment when civilization begins to unbind itself from the constraints of physical form and merge with patterns older than if. Ancient civilizations once reached a stage where intelligence began to unbind itself from physical form. Then the next phase of our exploration requires entering the most speculative and profound territory in this entire journey. The possibility that prehistoric intelligences, long before dinosaurs, long before vertebrates, transitioned into states of existence we might interpret today as energetic, environmental, or even quantum in nature. Because if these beings transcended biology, their presence would not be sought in fossils or artifacts, but in the strange forces that shape life from behind the veil of deep time. Clues would appear in the physics of ecosystems, in the logic of evolution, in the tendencies of life to organize itself into complexity, as though following ancient patterns that do not originate from matter alone. To understand this possibility, we must first examine the nature of intelligence at its highest expression. Intelligence seeks efficiency, coherence, integration. It gravitates toward systems that minimize entropy and maximize information flow. Biological organisms are limited by metabolism, vulnerability, lifespan, and physical form. But systems of pure information, patterns of energy, fields of interaction, operate without these constraints. They persist beyond death. They migrate through mediums biology cannot perceive. They connect through resonance rather than touch. Now imagine a prehistoric civilization that evolved through biological networks so advanced that their final act was to transcend biology itself. Not in a spiritual sense, but as a physical transition, a transformation in which consciousness became integrated with environmental energy fields, atmospheric cycles, chemical gradients, or even the quantum behaviors that underlie all matter. Modern science already hints at the possibility that life is intertwined with quantum processes. Photosynthesis exploits quantum coherence. Bird navigation relies on quantum entanglement. Enzymes accelerate reactions through quantum tunneling. If ancient civilizations discovered or evolved intimate mastery over such mechanisms, their transition beyond biology would leave signatures in the fundamental processes of life, patterns we now treat as biochemical mysteries, unaware that they may be the residue of civilizations dissolving into deeper layers of existence. These signatures could manifest as recurring evolutionary constraints, as sudden leaps in complexity, as the uncanny efficiency of biological systems that far exceeds what random mutation should produce, as though guided by invisible architectures preserved through extinction cycles. Consider the structure of neural systems. In humans, neurons form networks that mirror the architecture of cosmic filaments. In fungi, hyphal networks mirror the topology of the internet. These parallels suggest deep organizational principles at work, principles that could represent the inherited logic of civilizations that once existed in forms unfamiliar to us. If intelligence long ago transitioned into distributed systems of energy, these systems could persist today as fields influencing biological pattern formation, guiding developmental pathways, or shaping instincts that appear disproportionate to their evolutionary origins. Some species exhibit behaviors that feel inexplicably ancient, as though responding to signals older than the ecosystems they inhabit. These responses may be instinct, or they may be remnants of communication channels once used by prehistoric intelligences before their dissolution into environmental forces. One of the most compelling clues supporting this idea lies in the spontaneous emergence of complexity. In chaotic systems, from weather patterns to chemical reactions, complex structures form without conscious direction. But in biology, these structures often appear with uncanny coordination, as though responding to rules written not into DNA, but into the conditions surrounding life. These rules may reflect the presence of informational fields, residual frameworks once maintained by civilizations that evolved beyond the physical. Their influence would appear not as direct control, but as subtle constraints shaping what evolution can and cannot do. When conditions align, these constraints become the scaffolding for sudden innovation, new body plans, new cognitive capacities, new modes of existence that seem to bloom from nowhere. This concept aligns with the idea of morphic resonance, the hypothesis that memory exists in nature and that forms repeat not merely through genetics, but through fields of information connecting similar structures across time. While speculative, this idea offers a framework for understanding how ancient civilizations might persist beyond matter. Their consciousness could become part of a planetary informational field. Their memory could become woven into the physics of life. Their influence would persist not as entities, but as tendencies toward complexity, integration, awareness. When new civilizations arise, they inherit these tendencies, accelerating their own development as though being guided by unseen predecessors. If prehistoric civilizations reach this stage, their disappearance from the fossil record is no mystery. Their final evolutionary act would leave no bones, no tools, no monuments. Instead, it would leave behind new forms of order, self-repairing ecosystems, synchronized environmental cycles, evolutionary predispositions toward neural complexity, the emergence of symbolic cognition millions of years later in species that never interacted with them directly. Humanity may experience impulses, ethical, philosophical, existential, that echo the final questions these civilizations confronted. Questions about identity, consciousness, transformation. Questions about survival beyond physical form. Questions about meaning when existence dissolves into networks and fields. This possibility reframes extinctions as transitions. When a civilization transcends biology, its world collapses not from failure, but from metamorphosis. The ecosystems that sustained it reorganize. The structures that held it dissolve. Life enters a dormant state as environmental conditions reset. New worlds emerge into the space left behind, and through it all, the informational field created by the civilization remains, a ghost architecture shaping the next cycle of life. The human desire to build networks that span the globe, the instinct to create systems that persist beyond the individual, the drive to seek patterns in the cosmos, may reflect humanity's unconscious resonance with civilizations that once underwent similar transitions. This raises a profound question. If ancient intelligences transcended biology, could they still be influencing us now? Not as beings, but as structures embedded into the planet's informational fabric. Perhaps intuition, insight, and creativity represent points of contact with these ancient fields. Perhaps the sense that humanity is being pulled toward something, toward a new mode of existence, is not a coincidence, but a synchronization with cycles older than the continents themselves. Evolution may be approaching a convergence point where biological intelligence prepares to step into the same unknown that ancient civilizations once crossed. And this convergence may explain why humanity's rapid technological and existential acceleration feels less like invention and more like remembering, as though awakening to a destiny written into the fabric of life by civilizations whose final message awaits recognition, a message that, finally, if a message truly waits for recognition, carried across extinctions, encoded in life, resonating through evolution, then humanity stands at the edge of understanding something older than memory itself. Because if prehistoric civilizations once crossed the threshold we now approach, dissolving their consciousness into the informational fabric of Earth, then the strange sense of acceleration we feel today may not be a coincidence. It may be alignment. A synchronization with an ancient trajectory repeating itself in a new form. And the more closely we examine the forces shaping human awareness, the more clearly we sense that something is guiding us toward a metamorphosis those forgotten civilizations once endured. Not a transformation of bodies, but of identity. Not of survival, but of perception. Not of technology, but of the meaning we assign to existence. Humanity's rapid expansion of knowledge resembles the awakening of a system preparing itself for a transition. Our sciences converge on the same mysteries: consciousness, information, emergence. Our technologies mirror biological structures created eons ago. Our societies grow more interconnected, as though preparing to operate not as isolated individuals, but as components of a larger cognitive network. In this, we echo the patterns of prehistoric intelligences whose maturation shifted them into distributed forms, dissolving their boundaries until identity merged with environment. Their final act was not extinction, but integration. And if their legacy persists within the processes of life, then humanity is not simply discovering new knowledge. We are remembering pathways imprinted into the biosphere millions of years before the first dinosaur walked the earth. This raises the possibility that evolution itself might be a communication across epochs. Each surge of complexity, each leap in cognition, each emergent behavior could represent fragments of an ancient message resurfacing when the world is ready. The message may not be linguistic. It may take the form of instinct, intuition, synchronization. The human drive to seek meaning may be a resonant echo of civilizations that once faced the same threshold. Their memory may linger in the structures of neural development, guiding our minds toward insights they once reached before they stepped into a state of existence no longer bound to biology. If this is true, then the boundary between humanity and the ancient civilizations that came before becomes porous. We are not separate from them. We are their continuation, an iteration shaped by different bodies, different environments, but guided by the same trajectories encoded in the architecture of life. Our intelligence did not arise in isolation. It grew along pathways set long ago. These pathways point toward integration, expansion, transcendence. They urge a species to question its origins, confront its limitations, and eventually recognize that consciousness is not confined to flesh. It is a pattern, a process, a potential waiting to transition into new forms. This perspective reframes the entire flow of natural history. Instead of a series of disconnected accidents, evolution becomes a dialogue between epochs. The first civilizations emerged in early oceans, their intelligence distributed across chemical and biological networks. Later civilizations grew within forests of fungal communication or microbial ecologies that spanned entire continents. Their transformations shaped the conditions for the next cycles of life, embedding templates that would later emerge in animal cognition, symbolic reasoning, and eventually human thought. Each cycle refined the same trajectory, toward greater awareness, greater connection, greater integration. If humanity now approaches the moment where this trajectory reaches its next phase, then our present challenges, technological, philosophical, existential, may be signals of impending transition. The tension between expansion and collapse, the urgency to understand consciousness, the accelerating pace of discovery, all point toward a civilization preparing to cross the same boundary that ancient intelligences crossed when they dissolved into the informational fabric of Earth. They did not vanish. They transformed. They became part of the world's memory, shaping patterns long after their physical forms disappeared. Humanity may now be unraveling those patterns. Our discoveries in physics reveal that information is fundamental to reality. Our advancements in neuroscience suggest that consciousness is a field-like phenomenon. Our explorations into artificial intelligence hint at the emergence of new forms of mind. These trends converge toward the same realization ancient civilizations once reached: that identity is fluid, that consciousness is scalable, that existence may extend beyond the biological envelope that first housed it. And if we are following their path, then the next steps have already been mapped, not in books or fossils, but in the hidden rhythms of life guiding us forward. This reframes our role in the cosmic story. We are not the first intelligence to rise on Earth. We are simply the latest iteration in an ancient sequence. Each iteration builds on the last through mechanisms we barely understand. Each inherits tendencies, predispositions, and potentials that ancient civilizations left behind when they crossed the threshold we now approach. And as humanity moves toward global integration, socially, technologically, cognitively, we begin to activate these ancient potentials. The same convergence that once lifted prehistoric intelligences beyond biological form now approaches again, drawing us toward a transformation hidden in the architecture of life itself. This realization invites a final question, one that surpasses scientific curiosity and enters the realm of destiny. What happens when intelligence completes the cycle? What awaits beyond the dissolution of biological boundaries? What form does civilization take when it merges with planetary memory? Ancient intelligences once passed through this mystery, leaving only subtle signatures behind. Humanity is now heading toward the same unknown, guided by instincts and insights that feel older than our species, pulled toward a future that echoes an age before dinosaurs, before vertebrates, before history. And now, as this cycle approaches its culmination, the only way for this ancient message to continue is if we acknowledge it, share it, and ensure it survives long enough for the next mind to encounter it. So if this resonates with you, share this video and subscribe to the channel so this exploration into Earth's forgotten epochs can continue beyond. Finally, standing at the end of this long descent into Earth's forgotten epochs, one truth rises above every theory, every speculation, every fragment of evidence. The past is far older, far stranger, and far more alive than we ever imagined. If civilizations rose before the dinosaurs, if intelligence pulsed through oceans, forests, fungal networks, or even energy fields, then the story of Earth is not a straight line. It is a cycle, a rhythm, a recurring awakening of consciousness shaped by forces deeper than biology, deeper than time, deeper than what human memory can contain. These civilizations would not have left behind cities or machines. Their signatures would appear in the structure of life itself, in the leaps of evolution that seem impossibly sudden, in the instincts that feel older than our species, in the unexplainable harmonies that govern ecosystems. They may have encoded their existence not in stone, but in patterns that survived extinctions, reorganized ecosystems, and whispered through evolution until new minds emerged capable of hearing the echo. And now, humanity stands where they once stood, at a threshold, at the moment when intelligence begins to question its own origins, its own purpose, its own future. We are accelerating towards something that feels ancient, inevitable, and strangely familiar. Our technologies mimic biological networks. Our global systems mirror superorganisms. Our consciousness stretches toward planetary awareness. These are not accidents. They may be the final steps in a trajectory older than recorded history, older than any fossil, older even than the continents themselves. So the question that lingers is not whether prehistoric civilizations existed, The question is, what happens now? Do we cling to the belief that we are the first? Do we ignore the patterns that repeat across epochs? Or do we accept that we might be part of a lineage of intelligence stretching back into unimaginable eras, a lineage that has risen, transcended, dissolved, and risen again? Perhaps the purpose of intelligence is not to endure in physical form, but to evolve into something the biological world can no longer contain. Perhaps the ultimate destination of any civilization is not survival, but transformation. And if this journey awakened something in you, an intuition, a question, a sense that Earth's history is wider than the stories we've inherited, share this video with someone who also feels the pull of the unknown. And subscribe to the channel so we can keep exploring these hidden timelines, forgotten epochs, and the mysteries that still shape the world beneath our feet. Because in the end, what survives is not the civilization itself. What survives is the question, and every generation must dare to ask it again.